I have three. Everybody have 3 o'clock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll be able to begin now. So if you could just mute yourselves, just in case like a phone rings, just mute yourself so I don't have to worry about it. Okay, we are about to enter the time period of the 14th century, which was horrendous. Oh my God. I mean, as a full century, it was just awful for the Jews of Europe. I want to slightly backtrack because I want to sort of conclude the end of the 13th century. So I'm going to go back to England and just fill you in on what occurred there and how that Jewish community will come to an end for several hundred years. Now, when we just so you know, to make it full circle, the first Jews who came to live in England, I mean, who knows, it could have been a handful here and there, individuals, but the first recorded history that we have of Jews actually coming and settling in England is from the year 1066. That was the Battle of Hastings, and William the Conqueror, who was French, left France and conquered England. That's called the Norman Conquest. So at that time, accompanying him, or probably in the years after, were Jews. Obviously, they were French Jews, all right, because they were following William the Conqueror. And then that's how they came to settle in England. So that we're already talking about the very end of the 11th century. So in the 12th century, we already have 2 key incidents of terrible anti-Semitism. So I just want to bring that full circle. And the first one was in the year 1144, which is actually the first recorded bloodline case. It's a terrible man in France. And I remember that at the time when I discussed it with you, I actually read an excerpt, a description from contemporaries at the time describing, why they felt the Jews were responsible for this murder of this child. In any case, that was 1144. The next key incident is in the year 1189, and this was the Third Crusade, which was led primarily by Richard the Lionhearted. He was not responsible for what happened, but the passions were aroused at that time period. And whenever they thought, they're going to go and fight the infidels and reclaim the Holy Land, back from the Muslims into the Christian fold, they, on their way, they managed to attack Jews. So at that time, there was a terrible incident that occurred in the city of York. That's to the north of London, quite a bit up north, where Jews were attacked. And then they sought shelter in this tower. It's called Clifford's Tower. And there were really several hundred Jews who sought protection there. Did no good. Obviously, the mob broke in and massacred the people. And even those few who thought, okay, well, we'll try to save ourselves, we will officially convert, they were murdered too. So it did no good. There were, again, 500 Jews lost their lives in 1189. Now, we don't know as much about what occurred, then into the 13th century. Obviously, the Jews in England are living a rather precarious existence. I am sure additional accusations against them, occurred from time to time. And one of the chief things, why were they also attacking the Jews? Because they owed them debts. Okay, remember the Jews are the only money lenders officially permitted. And so obviously if you murdered the Jew, to whom you owed money, well, that was the end of your obligation to repay a debt. So, it's all mixed in with money. Unfortunately, these attacks upon the Jews.
Malka?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had trouble getting in. Where are you talking about?
Okay, I'm talking about the Jews of England, right? And now I'm about to go into what happened there in the 13th century.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. So following, if you'll remember, Richard the Lionheart, he's like this very beloved figure, even in folklore. When we talk about England, remember, and the evil, his brother, King John, right? So he's the one who becomes the king, right? So under King John, and then he had a son, Henry III. There were a bunch of Henrys. Shakespeare wrote plays then, Henry IV, Henry V. Okay, but the ones that the earlier part of when we're talking about the 13th century. So it's King John, and then it will be Henry the Third. Again, they viewed the Jews always as there was a source of income, because whatever money they made through their money lending things, which again was the basic occupation open to Jews at this time period, then they were heavily taxed by the king. All right. And the money would go then into the royal treasury. So it's like this love-hate relation. I don't know if it's even love at all, but somehow a semi-tolerant policy, but hatred of the Jews. I mean, I guess nobody likes to owe money to somebody, so it generates a lot of animosity. So apparently things became so terrible for the Jews living in England that actually even wrote a letter to the king at the time, maybe this is now already with Henry III, and they actually requested permission that they could leave England. But the king refuses them because he wants their money that they are generating, that he's then collecting as taxes. But gradually, slowly, their wealth is going to be diminished over a period of time. And whereas up until now, like the Jews are, so to speak, serving as the bankers. I mean, they are the ones who are lending money. Around the same time, or certainly the second half of the 13th century, there are a lot of Italian bankers who are going to move into England. They're coming from the region of Lombardy, it's northern Italy, and they're setting up shop there. And so even though this one source of income that's open to them, it's gradually going to be taken away from them. What happened in the year 1290, which will sort of bring to an end this era of Jewry in England, was that there was an accusation put out, and the church backed this, that the Jews were counterfeiting money. All right. And so finally, came to the fall of the year 1290, the king at that point, this is Edward the First, all right, he's expelled them. That's it. I don't want any more Jews living anymore in my territory. He did allow them to leave with whatever cash they had with them, but obviously any property that they owned, I mean, that remained and then became the property of the king. And of course, naturally, any debts that were owed to them, okay, this now became the property of the royal treasury. So I guess at this point, I figured I don't need these people anymore. I would need to borrow money. I'll turn to those Italians. All right. Now, the one nice thing that Edward did, he actually paid for, I guess, the ships that were going to be leaving England and going back to France. So he helped pay for whatever their passage might have been crossing there. Now, this is the English Channel. But a lot of the captains, I mean, it shows you how cutthroats they were. They robbed the Jews, whatever cash they had been allowed to carry with them. And they even threw some of them overboard into the Channel, so they met their deaths through drowning. And the majority of those Jews, though, they went back to France. That was their home prior to coming to England, and that's most of them settled there. But 16 years later, they're going to be expelled from France. So really a pretty horrible thing. Now, officially, no Jews were allowed to live in England until the time period of Cromwell. Remember, he had taken control. It was the end of the one era of monarchy. It was Charles I. He was actually beheaded. And until there's the restoration under Charles II. So in the interim, the ruler of England is Oliver Cromwell. And at that point, there were some Jews, obviously some Jews filtered back, but officially they were not allowed to reside in England. And then in the year 1656, they finally got official permission to actually outwardly live and conduct their lives as Jews. And when we come to that time period, which I don't know if we'll get to it this year, but we might next year when we continue studying Jewish history, I will then bring in my son Shalom to talk, because that is the era which his congregation, the Bevis Mark Synagogue, was founded. All right. And again, it was And I'm just going to give you just a little look ahead so you know. So who were these Jews who then came back? They call themselves Portuguese Jews because when they were officially expelled 1492 from Spain, a very large contingent will go to Portugal. Obviously, it's contingent. It's one land body, the Iberian Peninsula, and they're going to settle in Portugal. The king welcomes them, allows them to live there, but then years later, he's going to change his mind thanks to his lovely wife, who was a daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, and she insists that everybody there convert to Christianity. And they, well, I don't want to give away the whole story, but just those. So those Jews who ultimately will find their way to England, again, we're talking now the 16th century when this is going to happen, they are Portuguese Jews. They're really not the Spanish Jews, they are the Portuguese Jews. Okay, but we'll learn more about that. Okay, so I now concluded what happened to the Jews of England. And now we're talking about hundreds of years, right, from the year 1290 to 1565. They're officially, no Jews are allowed to live in England. All right, now I'm going to turn my attention now. So we had talked last time about what was happening to the Jews of Spain through the 13th century. I say we're now about to enter the time period of the 14th century. But first, I want to focus on what's happening primarily up to the Ashkenazi Jews. So we're talking about the Jews of France and the Jews of Germany. And I truly, as you'll see, as the story will unfold now, this was a most disastrous time for the Jews of Europe. Just horrible. We certainly learned about other terrible time periods and awful accusations against it, but like this whole century is just terrible. And it will be proved to be the same in Spain. I'll go back and tell you what's happening to those Jews. All right. There were plagues and social revolutions, and it went from country to country and locale to locale, and there was a total chaos actually at this time period. And while, of course, the Jews will suffer the most as a result of this upheaval and turmoil, all of Christian society is suffering, during this particular century. And the condition, especially of the lower classes, it just awful. But this obviously their suffering and then their animosity and anger will then turn against the Jews, unfortunately. Okay, so obviously the result will be massacres, will ultimately be expulsions. All right, and the Jews are just going to be forced to pick themselves up constantly and move from area to area. All right, and it's a testament to our faith, right? And our continued belief in God, and I guess I hope always that there will be a better future that kept these Jews going. But really, like, kol hakavod to them that they did remain as Jews. I'm sure here and there, of course, there were always some converts, but the bulk of the population, remained faithful to their Judaism. And they somehow did manage to survive, and that's why we are here to this day. So I want to focus first on France. That's a little more self-contained, and then I'll tell you what happens or happened to the Jews of Germany. Now, remember, I told you the Jews are expelled from England in the year 1290. We're not talking about huge numbers. I don't know, maybe a few thousand. I mean, it wasn't a tremendous population. And then, so they think, okay, we're going to seek refuge now in France. Again, that's where we came from originally, 200 years prior. And I'm sure maybe over that 200 years, maybe some other people filtered over to England. But as soon as they get there and they settle down and resume their lives, they're going to start being expelled from France as well. Now, it did not always include the entire country of France. Remember, because we talked about the Jews of Provence, when they live more independently, and there's certain parts along the coast, like Brittany, that England is still ruling over. All right, Normandy. Those areas of France belong to the King of England. But that area, that central part of France, is going to gradually expand and expand, and eventually the king will ultimately rule over the entire country. So Philip the Fair, he's the monarch in the year 1306, and he makes his decision. Well, he's going to expel the Jews from his territory. Now, the Jews did not go extremely far because obviously they had hope and confidence that they would at some point be re-invited back in, which ended up being the case. So either they went to sections of France where the king did not hold sway, or some of them might have gone into parts of Germany, where they felt things, at least temporarily, things appeared to be better. And sure enough, literally 9 years later, in the year 1315, the king, says, okay, you can come back in. Obviously, because he wants their money. That's the reason why he's doing it. And the ironic thing is, part of his reason that he gave for why he was expelling them, because they were charging, these Jews, they were charging such exorbitant rates of interest, with their money lending business. But the ironic thing was the Christians who then moved in to take over that business in the interim, they charged even higher rates of interest. So things weren't, even better. And besides which, the Jews were particularly vulnerable, and I told you they had these special taxes just on their community, and the king was missing, right, this wonderful source of income, so that's why he invites them back in. Now, his successor was Louis X, unfortunately, the Jews are being, with all this constant upheaval, they're getting more and more impoverished. They don't really have access to so many funds anymore as they had in past. So it really wasn't a very good business decision on the part of the king. And I told you how some of the Christian money lenders, they were charging even more than the Jews had, and then they were complaining then to the government about them. I don't know, just terrible. So again, that's why the Jews are invited to come back in, and their former communal properties, I don't think they're individual homes, but they're communal properties, wherever their synagogues were, the cemeteries, or those parcels of land are given back to them as well. So initially the Jews think, okay, good, things are going to be okay now. We've been invited back. We can reestablish ourselves, and build up, a certain measure of prosperity once again. But there were two particular groups, I'm going to talk about them, who were on the lowest echelons of society at that time, and they're going to rise to the fore and attack the Jews. Okay, the first one, this is in the year 1320. We're talking about literally 5 years after they have been invited back, and they're trying to rebuild their lives. And it consisted primarily of shepherds and obviously other peasants, from that time period. This is actually officially called the Shepherds' Crusade. I mean, their original goal with organizing themselves, same thing. They were going to go and fight against the infidels, blah, blah, blah. But naturally, just like with the former crusades from prior centuries, they're on their way. They're going to attack the Jews. It's interesting, their crusade, believe me, it never made its way anywhere to the Holy Land. They basically were just in France. They started off in northern France, and they moved gradually southward, and they actually enter part of northern Spain, particularly Aragon. Okay. So apparently their leader, there's always some charismatic leader who stirs people up and then creates this following. So he claimed that he had received this message, directly from God, that he was to lead this army to go on this great crusade. But really, this economic conditions were so terrible. So I guess I figured, well, what do we have to lose? So kind of rise up in rebellion. But naturally it takes a long while. And of course, I told you they never even got to the Holy Land. So along the way, they're going to start attacking the most vulnerable population, the only non-Christians living in their midst are going to start attacking the Jews. And naturally, that a way of confiscating their property along the way. Now, they also, though, attacked the nobility because a lot of their anger and animosity is directed against the upper classes because look, they're the ones with all the riches and they are the ones on the lowest echelons of society with nothing. So obviously, the resentment is also, against the nobility. And finally, as a result, after this campaign of terror, and all these horrible attacks upon the Jews, so finally then, the king is going to, plus the noblemen, they're going to themselves organize an army to go after this horde of, shepherds and peasants. And they actually put them down very, very cruelly. But of course, by the end, hundreds and hundreds of Jews have lost their lives. Literally 1 year later, in the year 1321, there's going to be another campaign. And this is going to be organized by the lepers in their society. Now, I never knew myself that there were so many lepers in France, but obviously it was a certain, measurable number of them who did live there. And of course, look, if those shepherds and the various peasants, who joined that shepherd crusade, if they thought they were on the lower rungs of society, believe me, the lepers are on, I think, even worse than the Jews. They were on the lowest rung, of society at that time. And people were afraid of them. You didn't want to get near them, So they actually treated them almost like beasts, they say. And somehow this rumor started, right, in that year, 1321, that the lepers were starting to spread disease, among the general population. So then some of them were arrested and tortured. And so they made a confession. Actually, you're being tortured. You'll say anything to try to save yourself and stop the horrors that are being done to you. And then they started spreading their own rumor. Oh, no, like it wasn't us. We weren't trying to harm the population. Oh, it was those Muslims. And no Muslims living in France. And those Jews. And what is it that they're being, what did they accuse them of? Of poisoning the wells. So that's where the origin of the accusation against the Jewish population, that we poison, the water supply, starts in this year, right? 1321. Now you can imagine the fear that spread then throughout, the bulk of France at this time. I mean, you're dependent on your water supply to survive, and now you're being told it's poisoned. And of course, it was disease was always rampant. In those days, they had no ways of fighting against it. And even like when we learned about Spain, and then obviously the Rambam in Egypt, medicine was a much higher level. They were more skilled, more cognizant of the body in the Sephardic lands, but not in these Ashkenaz lands. They were really pretty ignorant. Not to say that there were no physicians at all, but just their knowledge was on a very low level. So now there's this new accusation and this new belief that the Jews, they are responsible for poisoning the wells and spreading disease. Of course, the ironic thing is the Jews, of course, were drinking the same water. I mean, this supply, it was a supply that was available to anybody. So, but I managed to overlook that, just blaming the Jews no matter what. And apparently hundreds and hundreds of Jews are attacked and then themselves are tortured and then put to death. Really just awful. And then the king naturally steps in, and he starts demanding even more exorbitant funds from them. Whatever. As I say, the more as I did my research and read about what was happening to the Jews in this century, it just was horrendous. So then again, at the end of 1322, the king decides, okay, expels them again. Can you imagine? 1309 throws them out. 1315 invites them back in. Then there are all these attacks against them, of course, by the shepherds and then the lepers, and and then 1322, literally they came back just in 1315, throws them out again. Okay, but now a larger span of time will now pass. The Jews are officially, I presume there always were some Jews somehow managed to remain, or maybe they outwardly or did convert to Christianity, I'm not sure. But in the year 1359, the king decides, okay, I need them nationally because of their money supply, and he invites them back in that year. Now, this is a time period of what we call the 100 Years' War, which was a huge battle between England and France over who's going to rule over, particularly, I told you, remember there were those regions of France that are still owned by the King of England, and, the French want to wrest it back, under their rule. As this goes on for 100 years, and the official years are 1337 to 1453. So you can say, I'm not talking now about 1359. So the King of France is in need of funds. Obviously, somehow he has to, pay his troops, have military supply. So he needs a source of money. That's why he invites the Jews to come back in. Again, they're used as money lenders, and then heavy taxes are imposed upon them. Should they the money starts running out, then they confiscate their property. Just terrible. And so for the interim, okay, he's invited back in the year 1359. Now the Jews at this point, they don't trust anybody. So apparently they actually managed, I don't know, somehow to convince the king he wrote like a written promise that he would guarantee that he would protect them for at least 20 years. Okay, maybe at that point, 20 years seemed like a very long time. And as we're going to soon learn about what's going on in Germany at this time, remember I told you quite a large number of them had then moved to Germany temporarily. And conditions in Germany are going to get just worse and worse. So I guess, you're kind of caught there between the two sides. Okay, I figured, let's go back to France. Things seem better, more stable there. So even though it's just a 20-year guarantee, but okay, they do move back. So the kings of France at this time, that's Charles V and Charles, this is, by the way, when I start talking about Germany, that's the Holy Roman Empire, which is sort of shrinking. It used to include France and Germany. At this time period, it's going to be, the French kings are getting more powerful, so they can rule over their whole country. So the emperor, the Holy Roman Empire, that we're talking about primarily Germany. So there's going to be a Charles there too. So I guess it was a popular name. Obviously, things are not good in France. I'm going to tell you why. Something else horrible happened that's going to affect all of Europe at this time period. So all those ugly feelings against the Jews, all those false accusations, they're all going to come to the fore and coalesce, around this same time period. And then apparently there was a certain Jew who had baptized, who had converted to Christianity. He goes back to Judaism. I mean, there's like this whole uproar that occurs in France. So in the year 1394, the Jews once more are expelled from all of France. And at this point, the French king is ruling over the majority of French land. So it's including those Jews in the southern region who for a very long, over 250 years, we had to live relatively secure lives. It's interesting. So obviously some of the territory that still is belonging to England, all right, that's still a disputed area. And also, I don't know if you remember learning this when you did world history, but around the town of Avignon, remember there were like two different popes? Remember there was a pope in Rome, there was a pope in Avignon. So the popes were ruling over Avignon. So the Jews who lived there, were safe and secure. Do you all know that French song? Sur le pont d'Avignon, only danser. My mother used to sing that to me, so I remember that. So actually, Charlotte went to Avignon, obviously pre-pandemic, last year, I guess, at some point. So there is a bridge there, which is the Avignon Bridge, on which that that song comes from. But the bridge is actually broken now. You can't cross it. It's like broken in the middle. It doesn't. There are still some remnants of it. Okay, and so that's going to bring to an end until a much later period the history of the Jews in France. So we talk about 1290, that brings to an end Jewish life in England. 1390, literally 100 years later, 1394, we're going to talk about the expulsion of Jews from France. And of course, another 100 years, it will be 1492, and they will be expelled from Spain. All right. And just as I say, I cannot imagine what a frightening life the Jews who lived, in this century had. Constant fears of being attacked and massacred or being expelled from their homes and having to reestablish themselves. Just awful. Now I'm going to switch more to what's happening then in Germany at this time period. Okay. Now, believe me, life was no great in Germany either. We had learned this once before. Again, at the very end of the 13th century, in the year 1298, there was this man Rindfleisch who gathered up a group of people, adherents to again attack the Jews. All right. Apparently, again, the year 1336 to 1338, there were two noblemen, petty noblemen. These were not top echelon people, who also gathered together a mob. These men were called Armleder. Okay, apparently they wore a piece of leather around their arm, and that's how they're known. They went throughout southwestern Germany, also spreading again the usual litany of accusations against the Jews. Ritual murder, host desecration. I guess I could have included the poisoning of the wells too, but believe you me, that's going to come into play soon in full force. And now we're going to talk about the most horrible, terrible thing that occurred in the 14th century to everyone living in Europe, not just the Jews, and that is the Black Plague. And I'm going to, describe a little bit about what that was like, and again, then how it will ultimately affect the Jews living there as well. Now, apparently, they try to trace, where did it come from? So they knew it was coming from the east because they felt it was brought, they feel the first area or first port to be affected by this bubonic plague was Genoa, Italy, that ships coming laden with goods from the east, set sail, and then they arrived at the port, and in the hold were these rats. And it wasn't the rats really themselves who carried the disease, it was the fleas on them. And then they would spread out and they would bite people, and that's how you would catch it. But ultimately, you could catch it afterwards if you got near somebody. You didn't have to have the flea bite you. You would catch it from another person. So it was really pretty horrible. Literally hundreds of thousands of people died during this bubonic plague. And it started, I told you, towards the end of that year, maybe 1347, 48, 49, goes into like 1352. It was just terrible. They had no concept and idea. How was this disease spreading? It was a very frightening, and you would die from this within literally days of contracting the disease. And why is it called bubonic? Because the flea would bite the person, and then these like bulbous sort of like tumors would cover their body, and they turned black. And that's why it's called the Black Death. So that, right, to explain, both aspects of it. And then I guess it also calls you bloody vomit. I mean, it was just, I'm telling you, literally within days you would die, and it was highly, highly contagious. And a whole household would die. A whole village would die of it, and it ran through the towns. They actually estimate, I mean, as frightening as this pandemic is that we're in right now, they estimate anywhere between a third to a half of the population of Europe died as a result of this Black bubonic plague. So it didn't matter if you were a poor peasant living in your little hovel, or you were some fancy nobleman in your manor house. Everyone was affected, by this terrible plague. Now, again, they don't understand at all how disease is transferred at this point. And naturally, it is already in their minds. This has now been hundreds of years that they have been preached to by the church, that the Jews are always somehow to blame for all their ills of society. So sure enough, now remember, I told you not so long before this, already remember through the lepers, the Jews had been accused of poisoning the wells. So again, they don't understand, where is this disease coming from? It's the Jews. They have poisoned our wells, and that's why we are getting sick. Now, so were the Jews immune from the Black Plague? No. But as opposed to, let's say, half the population died, 20% of Jews died from it. Okay, so let's try to understand. So why were the Jews perhaps not as affected, by the Black Plague? I think part of it is just because of halachic reasons, how we're, big stress on cleanliness. We're always washing our hands, right? Every time you wake up in the morning, every time you eat, you're always washing your hands. Certainly once a year, even if you might be a sloppy person, but once a year you have to thoroughly clean your house, to get ready for Pesach. So our standards of cleanliness were on a much, much higher level, than those of the Christian neighbors. It's there's no way to know 100%, as I say, and certainly Jews did die of the bubonic plague. There's no question about that, but not in quite as large numbers as, again, some of the Christians among whom they lived. And again, although a flea is a flea, so I don't know, it doesn't matter really how clean you are or not. I mean, if you're going to be bitten by one, but maybe by the very fact that they did keep to relatively very high standards of cleanliness. Maybe they didn't have the rats running through their larders as much as, it might have been in Christian households, but somehow, they, while still suffering and getting the plague and dying from it, but not, as I say, not quite as large numbers. So now we now become the scapegoat. I mean, actually, every time people don't understand what's going on, we are the easiest people to turn to and blame. Remember, even at the beginning of this current pandemic, there were, in certain circles, there were people who were accusing the Jews of somehow nefariously, spreading it. Of course, all those vaccines that are out there are because of Jews now. So we need to thank. Now, again, in the Christian mind, the Jew is always associated with the devil. So when, again, you're frightened, this plague is running rampantly through your communities, and, people are dying before your very, very eyes. Who is to blame? We don't understand, as I say, and that's why their typical scapegoat, the devil, the Jew, he is to blame. The accusations also, the blood libel, that's also going to come, to the fore. And of course, the Christians are now mobs are going to rise, and they're going to attack the Jews who live in their midst. So it could be of the 20% who die of the plague. Now they're even more going to die because they're going to be killed, by these Christian hordes. And they say, tens of thousands of Jews were murdered, during this time period. And specifically, the Jews somehow in Germany seem to have suffered the most. And they say that the area of Bavaria, that's southeastern Germany, and the Rhine Valley, so that's more northeastern, just terrible massacres against the Jews occurred at this time period. And the emperor would only sort of step in to try to contain these mobs when again, potentially it was going to affect his pocket. And then he might step in and, and try to, put down these mobs attacking the Jews because he needs the Jews as a source of money for himself. Now it's interesting. The Pope at this time, his name was Clement VI. He actually sent letters around, urging that the Jews should be protected, but they totally ignored him. And the Holy Roman Emperor's name is Charles IV, and I told you he makes some amount of effort, to also put down all these ugly things against attacks upon the Jewish people. Now I read in another case, I said like 20%, they remember they say died of the actual bubonic plague, but literally 50% of the Jews, with all these massacres and attacks, and you'll see their expulsions from the towns, 50% of them they feel might have died during this time period. It's interesting. Somehow, I think to this very day, we're viewed as somehow we're wealthy. How many poor Jews do you know? I mean, I'm thinking I was sarcastic because there are many Jews who are living at a subsistence level. We're not all rich. I mean, nowadays I would say the bulk of us are middle class, but certainly in those days, so there were always a few obviously wealthy people, but the bulk of the Jews were really relatively poor at this time. But I guess the ones that they dealt with or were more visible, I don't know, or just in their minds, those Jews, we were always looking to amass more and more money. We're always taking advantage of the non-Jewish population, and so there was just so easy to attack us and accuse us of every possible thing. And you see, even in the case of the emperor, or even maybe some of the noblemen, they would only intervene when it started hurting their own pockets. Otherwise, well, okay, so kill the Jews. Don't blame me. Kill those people. You already hate them, right? So go ahead and massacre them. And what happened is that besides, obviously killing Jews, many Jews at this point are going to be expelled from various towns throughout Germany. But because Germany is fragmented, remember, again, going back to when you learned world history, I mean, Germany only becomes a unified country in the 19th century under Bismarck. Remember the Iron Fist? So we're really talking about like different, so to speak, like little principalities or dukedoms, throughout Germany. So you might be expelled from one area of Germany, okay, cross the border and seek refuge in another area. And this is going to go on throughout this entire century. Meanwhile, remember, they're not allowed to live in France anymore. So where are these Ashkenazi Jews going to be going? Some will, again, be going to Bohemia. But again, this is all under the Holy Roman Emperor, right? He ruled actually over vast territories, even parts of northern Italy. And where will they have a place to seek refuge? But I guess the one saving grace you could say is, as opposed to France, where they are expelled from the entire country, from all the borders, in Germany, they can go from one area to another, and then sometimes, if conditions in that original place seem to settle down, then they will return once more to their original, town where they live. But a great upheaval that's happening, during this time. So you have to understand that the Holy Roman Emperor, who at one point was sort of this all-powerful ruler, he doesn't have the power because the noblemen are actually strong. There's no strong central government in Germany at this point. You almost say like the Jews, we're like you're playing chess, and we're these little pawns, and we're playing games with them, moving them around. That's what's happening. And again, it's always motivated very frequently. Obviously, initially, it's motivated by fear. That's why they are attacking the Jews. But part of it, they're looking for monetary gain. They get rid of the Jews. They're going to confiscate all their goods, all their property. But then on the other hand, well, then the key rulers, there's now a loss of income. So just constant game playing that's going on. And the Jews are just literally caught in the middle of all this ugliness that's going on. Let me just make sure I have everything I want to tell you here. Okay. So I said combination of attacks upon them, expulsions, they're considered enemies of God. Yeah, they were a danger. Okay. It's going to be towards the end of this time period where Jews will gradually turn more and more eastward. And that's how we end up ultimately in Eastern Europe, the bulk of us. But, they're still trying somehow to save themselves and, just moving around within Germany itself. When the plague finally seemed to simmer down, came to an end, I don't know, they had herd immunity. I mean, I don't quite know how it worked that it came to ultimately an end. I mean, I guess that's how the pandemic of 1918, I mean, it did come to an end at some point in the later part of 1920. There certainly were no vaccines in those days. So then the various rulers, are going to come together. They want to try to reorganize their government. And the noblemen are going to sign a document together with the emperor to define their various roles. And it was something in the year 1356. It was called the Golden Bull. The emperor this time, again, he's at Charles IV. He had to give up a lot of his power that he had for over many years. And that included his role vis-a-vis the Jews, in his country. I hadn't talked about this as much, but I think it's important to understand the growing role and power of the towns. I remember I actually took a course in medieval history, general medieval history when I was in college. And I remember there were several books that we had to read that talk about the growth of cities at this time and the key role that the town councils are going to play vis-a-vis wresting power from either the noblemen in whose area they lived, or certainly that of the emperor who ruled, more as like a title, so to speak, that the emperor had. He didn't really have good control over the entire country. And so again, they're now going to force, all right, they're going to have to reach some sort of compromise. Again, the town councils are growing in power, all right? He's still an emperor, though. He obviously was sufficiently respected figure. They didn't overthrow him, at this point. So remember, the key thing was taxes, right? How are you going to wrest control over the money that the Jews have? In a lot of situations, taxes, which formerly would have gone directly to the emperor, the town councils now demand the money is going to go to us, all right? The Jews are living in towns, they're not in the countryside. It's going to come to us, or a certain portion of it will go perhaps to the overall noble or duke who ruled over that certain section of Germany. And there were some cities that were not affected by this. They were considered imperial cities, and one of them was Frankfurt am Main, which later becomes a very large Jewish community. And the only tax that went directly to the emperor was something they called it the golden penny tax. So like a certain, relatively minor, but every Jew had to pay this, would go to the emperor. So, he wasn't abrogating his total control over the Jews in his midst. He still wanted a certain guarantee that funds would be collected and sent to him. But a lot of the taxes now are going to go to the towns because the towns are going to grow in power. And apparently there was also a tax that, I don't know if it was imposed upon the Jews just at the time of an emperor's coronation, or it just became an annual tax. And so that was another way that they raised money off of the Jews. All right. So again, remember I told you how the Jews are going from section to section of Germany. But when the money seems to run out, they really don't like those Jews, but they're going to invite them back. And this is just going to be this little game that's going to be played out throughout Germany. But how this affects the Jews is that the town only wants the wealthy Jews back. They don't want those poor Slavic Jews who aren't contributing anything, and they can't tax them. They have no money. So they're only going to allow back a certain element of Jew. I mean, sometimes that wealthy Jew will then try to ingratiate himself and convince them to allow other Jews to come. He needs them to set up his community, but such a terrible, precarious position that the Jews are in there. As I say, just unbelievable. So I see we're running out of time. We'll continue next time, continue to learn about what happens to the Jews of Germany and what happens till we get to the end of this 14th century. So be well. May you all stay healthy. You and your whole family, only good things. And some of you up north, it's very cold. Let me tell you, today it is so hot in Florida.